First of all, sir, thank you very much for granting this interview. I've talked to President Nicu Șordan the other day, and he told me that the question of legitimacy of his presidency is now solved with the American administration. Is that so?
I thought it was solved months ago. I think the president, his relations are pragmatic. And I think immediately after the election, we saw him congratulate it. We actually have a U.S. ambassador in place now. He named the ambassador after the election, and Romania is an important strategic partner for the United States. So the president, I think, was ready to move on the day after the election. And what I'm most pleased about is not so much that we accept that the government's legitimate. That was never a question. It's what Romanians are, I think, bringing to the table with the United States is almost the perfect agenda. All the things that are really important to the U.S., good for Romania, the things that are really not just going to strengthen the bilateral relationship, but really help both countries. And I'm really excited that these are the things that Romanians are pushing on the table, and that's great.
Now, can you still be friends with the United States without having a MAGA-like regime in Bucharest? Because our MAGA wannabe movement,
right.
our and pot and sauce, they're not in power. They aspire to be. They try to, make contacts with the administration. So how do you feel? Can we still be friends with the Trump administration without being our...
Well, look, I mean, how can I be blunt? I mean, there's a lot of people say, if you put on a MAGA t-shirt and wear a MAGA hat or build a Trump hotel, you'll get everything you want out of Donald Trump. And honestly, I got to be honest with you, it doesn't work that way. When the president says his job as president of the United States is to look after the interests of the United States, if you're bringing something to the table that is good for the United States, and even better, if it's good for the United States and it's good for you, because the best deals are deals where both sides win. The president's engaged, and he is your partner. So I'll give you a good example. Australia, I mean, we could not have a more liberal government than. And I was in Australia, and the president and the prime minister had met President Trump. They were very nervous, different politics and everything else. And we said, look, if you go to the United States and you talk about things that are important to you and important to us, critical minerals, submarine deal, defense cooperation, it's going to be fine. And he did that, and relations with Australia have been terrific. So it's about the what's in the best interest of the two countries, not whether you're wearing a MAGA hat or not.
Now, what do we need to do to keep the American troops in? I mean, we have MK.
Right.
And we've had the Veselu, the anti-Iraq at the Aegis onshore, and we've got Câmpia Turzii, which is the air base. What do you think the plans are defining right now with the administration, and what does America need to do to keep this relationship going? Yeah,
well, look, on the security side, I would say, I've always said this in the most sincere way, that Romania is the third most important country in NATO. And the reason for that is if you look at the real physical threat to the security, and that is Russia, right? And the answer is conventional deterrence that is so strong that Russians know that no territory is for free. Russians have a much bigger problem than they've ever had before. They've got 1,000 extra miles of frontier with Finland, Sweden, and Norway. But you have Poland, which is the keystone. Poland is the new West Germany. It is the centerpiece of forward deterrence against Russia. Arguably the most important country in NATO today. Both liberal and conservative governments, doesn't matter, they're still committed to the defense of Poland. Second most important country in NATO is Ukraine, which I know Ukraine's not in NATO, but honestly,
it does look like that way.
But it's irrelevant. It's completely irrelevant. Russia cannot attack Western Europe and just wave at the Ukrainians like, I'm going to Latvia, right? So Ukraine is an obstacle to the Russians, and it is a bulwark of future conventional deterrence in Europe. And the third country is Romania, because Romania is the anchor of the eastern flank. It's right on the Black Sea, and so what Romania brings to the table, which is more important than anything, is defense plans, which Romania developing the capacity to defend Romania and to project power into the Black Sea. That is everything. So look, I mean, we're going to be there because just the mere fact of the military facilities and the geographical location and the importance of Romania, there are going to be American troops there. There's always going to be American stuff going in and out there. And it's only going to be more so as those capabilities are developed. I think people obsess about, whether something is permanently stationed or not. It's irrelevant. There's always going to be an American presence there. And we're always going to be, as long as the United States is concerned about the conventional deterrence in Europe, Romania is going to be an important partner, and there are going to be Americans there.
Are we strong enough there? Conventionally speaking.
It's all relative, right? You only have to be strong in your enemy. I think right now the Russians don't really have. I don't think anybody thinks the Russians have the capacity to conduct conventional operations in anywhere in Western Europe right now. The question is, can we keep it that way in the future? And I think if we stay on the glide path we are on, that the Russians are never gonna represent a real conventional deterrent to Europe. The challenge for me is what I call is the deterrence gap. So we've spent really the last couple of years, increasing European capability. We have new commitments now, new things coming online. The United States, we've got 3 theaters. We've got the Middle East, we've got Europe, we've got Indo-Pacific. We can't be strong everywhere all the time. We've got to move things around a bit. What's critical is, as the United States does move something, that creating a gap between what European capability is and what Americans bring to the table, and that's the important thing. And so what Romania is doing is on a path to do is to make a really, really solid anchor on the eastern flank, and the Americans will be in there with the things that really empower and enable the Romanians to do their job.
Now, there's a discussion in Europe right now about the nuclear umbrella. Should Europeans get their own nuclear weapons? This is what they're asking themselves. Poles and others are thinking maybe the Americans one day will say, hey, our nuclear umbrella is also gone, so you should take care. On the other hand, we're bound to the non-proliferation treaty. Right. So I hear talk that EU might be considering becoming a nuclear power.
Yeah. So the operative word that you hear in all these conversations is talking about.
Yes.
Right. And you know what? That's, I think, about as far as it goes. Now, look, I've only been in the nuclear weapons business since I was a second lieutenant. So I only have 50 years experience in this field. The world has changed, right? In the Cold War, we had strategic deterrence, and then we had theater nuclear weapons, right? And the idea is that the theater nuclear weapons were the linkage between conventional deterrence and strategic deterrence, so that if you were losing the conventional war, you could demonstrate that this will escalate into a larger war. That world's gone. Theater nuclear weapons are useless and stupid. I don't care how many the Russians have. They're completely impractical. Here's the lesson of Ukraine. If you can't win a conventional war, you don't start a nuclear war. So the linkage between a strong strategic deterrent and conventional deterrent is stronger conventional deterrence, not theater nuclear weapons, right? That's a waste of money. So if every nickel you spend on strategic deterrence makes that strategic umbrella more important and more viable. People have no idea the amount of money and technology and resources that you have to put into building nuclear weapons, right? Which they don't need. And every nickel that you spend on a nuclear deterrent is a nickel that you're not spending on the thing that will really protect you, which is conventional deterrence. So this notion that somehow you need to replace the American nuclear deterrent is, one, you can't do it, you can't afford it, and you don't have the technology base, and you have to break all kinds of treaties and laws to do that. So it's just stupid. And then the question is, why are you doing this? If there's one thing that we agree on in the United States, and we don't agree on anything, We don't agree on hamburgers or hot dogs, right? We disagree on everything here, except Democrats and Republicans agree on one thing, which is investing in strategic deterrence. I mean, we are putting all kinds of money into nuclear modernization. We're putting all kinds of money into strategic missile defense. So we are building a nuclear deterrence that is capable of matching the Chinese and the Russians, which, by the way, the Europeans are never going to be able to build. I mean, do you think that if you took the British and the French nuclear arsenals together, that this is like a pygmy thrusting little tiny pebbles at
it's maybe like a tenth of US, I think.
Well, or the Russians or the Chinese, right? And that's not counting the tactical nuclear weapons, which the Russians have gazillions of. So it's a stupid idea. I mean, it may politically make sense or something, but if it ever becomes anything more than talk, I'll be shocked, because I don't know how to put this. And I love the Poles. And maybe there's an argument for forward positioning some theater weapons, and I don't care. But the idea of an independent European strategic nuclear umbrella. By the way, you'd also have to have missile defense to match that, because if you've got nuclear weapons, you have to be able to defend against nuclear weapons. The cost of that is so astronomical, and when you look at all the things that Europe has to do, it makes no sense. It's like somebody that can't afford to put food on the table, like saying, I've got to go out and buy a Mercedes.
Yes. On the other hand, Europeans are a bit worried, and I'm included.
Yeah.
My generation, we've all been Reagan Republicans.
Right.
And the world was very simple at
right.
the time. You had the United States,
right.
the beacon of democracy and freedom, right. and you had the Russia, which was the evil empire, and right. so on. And nowadays, this blurring, the whole thing becomes a mess. You don't know who the friends are and who the enemies are, and you clearly can see America, at least under Trump administration, causing up to the Russians. And Europeans are a bit worried. Is this a real thing?
Yeah, so you know when Europeans were worried about the American strategic nuclear umbrella? The 1940s, the 1950s, the 1960s, the 1970s, the 1980s. They didn't care in the 1990s because nobody cared in the 1990s, but then ever since then. So every European generation has said, well, the American nuclear, they all worry about that. And that's fine, because I say we should be much more sympathetic to Europeans, because we're not sitting next to the war in Ukraine, right? Yeah. We're not hosting masses of Ukrainian refugees. The Russians aren't next door, right? So we should be a little sympathetic.
We can hear explosions in Romania.
Yeah,
close to our border.
But all that being said, the notion that strategic umbrella isn't as viable or more viable today than it was 20 years ago, it's just not true. And you can worry about it all you want. Every generation of Europeans is worried about us at one time or another. Fine. And I've lived through most of it.
This is the first time America and Russia are getting dangerously close.
Yes. Okay, so we're getting dangerously close because we've kicked the Russians out of Venezuela. We kicked them out of the Middle East. We are sanctioning the hell out of their oil industry. We are encroaching on all their interests in the Caucasus and Central Asia. So how exactly are we getting closer to the Russians? What have we done for the Russians lately? Trump is actually, people forget that Donald Trump was the first guy to give weapons to the Ukrainians. If Donald Trump wanted to throw Ukraine under the bus and hand the world over to the Russians, he would have done that on day one. He wouldn't have wasted a year trying to end the war and a year continuing to find ways to support Ukraine. So somehow that Trump is nice to the Russians. The only thing that's missing in that whole nice to the Russians narrative is the actual fact where the Russians are actually benefit from Trump being nice to them, because there is no actual evidence of Trump doing anything for the Russians except, saying, well, Vladimir Putin's, I can work with him. But he's also said he can work with Xi. And one time he said, hey, I can make a deal with Maduro. And he says, I can work with the mullahs. So Trump will work with anybody that wants to work with him. But the notion that somehow we have weakened Europe in the face of the Russians compared to what the Europeans have done in the face of the Russians, it wasn't Donald Trump that said, let's build Nord Stream 2. It wasn't Donald Trump that said, let's send helmets to Ukraine when Ukraine was invaded. It's not Donald Trump that like Macron wanted to go and make a deal with the Russians. So I hear this, I get it, but honestly, all it lacks is kind of grounding in reality.
You put a lot of passion into this. You clearly do care a lot about how we see this, and I can see that basically you're my generation. And for us, as we grew up, different countries, I grew up under the communist regime. I was in the army, in the Romanian army during the communist regime, and I was taught the silhouettes of American jet fighters at the time, because we were anti-aircraft. We were an anti-aircraft radar, and somehow we have become friends. We always wanted to be friends with Americans. We never liked the Russians, and you probably know the history of Romania. Now, we still want to be friends.
Well, let me tell you one thing about Donald Trump, and this actually comes from personal experience. And Trump and I are kind of really the same generation. And I was in the Army for 25 years. I never thought I would live to see the day where I could just walk through the Brandenburg Gate and then turn around and walk back.
Really?
I never thought that I would ever be able to walk the streets of Bucharest or Budapest. This is stuff that I never thought would happen in my lifetime. So yeah, I am passionate about this because, I mean, you know, Central Europeans and Americans, we have history, culture, far exceeding the Cold War. We have so much in common. They're wonderful people. I'm really glad I never had to fight them. This was the greatest victory of our generation. So I would rather die than see the world take a step backward from that. And this is where I talk about Donald Trump. You can say a lot of things about Donald Trump, but the one thing he doesn't like is to lose. So the fact that he would ever be the president of the United States on the day that 1 inch of Europe was ceded back to the Russians, back to a totalitarian regime, that's not in his DNA. You know, here's my assessment of not just Europeans but also Americans. 99% of the Donald Trump hate is I don't like the way he talks about it. That's not how I would do it. It's not about what he's actually trying to do. We all want to end the war, right? We all want a free and independent Ukraine that can defend itself. We all want prosperity in Europe and America. We all want to be free. Okay, so nobody has a problem with what he's trying to do. They just don't like how he does it. And, you know, my answer to that is, okay, but, you know, that's how he's doing it. And he's not going to change. So, you know, what can I tell you?
Now, what does Europe need to do in order to be more liked by the current administration? Let's take, for instance, immigration.
Well, here's a dirty little secret. I think Donald Trump is getting everything he needs from Europe. The number one thing we need from Europe is strengthening conventional deterrence against Russia, because and they're delivering on that. So I actually think that block is kind of checked. The things that the United States would like from Europe are things that would make a stronger Europe. And this is, to me, look, I mean, this isn't the United States dictating to Europe what it needs to do. This is what Europeans tell me. And okay, you all disagree on the solutions, but nobody argues that migration hasn't created problems. Nobody argues that energy prices are not unaffordable. Nobody argues that Europe isn't getting the level of growth it has. Nobody argues that, we should have, you know, free and open societies and democracy should be safe. Now, you have different ideas on how to do that, but you all acknowledge it's a problem for Europe. And so this is not this isn't me saying you've got these problems. You say you have these problems.
Yes, we do. But they could become even greater if the extreme right movements are being financed by the American administration, for instance.
Well, first of all, I think overwhelmingly the U.S. policy in Europe, our policy is to be pragmatic. So Trump's going to work with anybody that's going to work with Trump. So that, I don't think that is an issue. The United States cannot...
Do you foresee financing for that kind of movement in Romania, for instance? We already have them in place, and they kind of feel like they're a bit on the Russian side when it comes to preferences.
Well, look, here's what, look, the thing about what's I think a little confusing for Americans, which it shouldn't be, but it is they go, I want to work with the Europeans who are like me. And my answer to that is, well, who are they? Because if you actually look at the American conservative movement, the coalition that Trump has brought together, it's actually very diverse. And it actually includes, people that, have weird ideas on foreign policy. And, well, that's what the Europeans, right? So that there is no we're going to support the people who are like us, because the European right is diverse, just like America. So there is nobody that's exactly like us, because we're not even exactly like us. There's no such thing as core MAGA, right? When you actually say, well, who's core MAGA? It's like, well, who are you? Right?
Are you?
Does everybody? Well, no, because because American conservatives are actually quite diverse. Actually, if you took everybody in Europe from the center right to the populists, right, and you put them in a boat and sailed them to the United States, that would be the American conservative movement. So our politics are on the right are just as diverse as yours. And I think practically speaking, there's no way that the United States can practically dictate the politics of Europe. That's just the reality of it. And the other thing is the U.S. overriding interest of the United States is to be pragmatic in our relations, not to have everybody in Europe wear a MAGA t-shirt, because what would that actually tell you? Nothing, because, and we can't do it anyway.
Are you optimistic the way the world is going?
I tell people if Europe were a stock on the stock exchange, I would buy Europe. I think, because I still think that this is a land of amazing potential, and I think that, look, I don't worry that Europeans disagree with each other. Maybe it's because I'm an American. Our system is, we like when we disagree with each other, because that's how we think we make progress, by arguing this stuff out, right? And that arguing is not a sign of disagreement. Arguing is a sign that you're serious about this, and hopefully by arguing and debating, you'll figure out the best path forward. So the fact that Europeans are arguing about this, I take that as a healthy sign. But in the end, only Europeans can fix the great challenges of Europe, and we know what they are. It's migration, it's energy, it's growth. I mean, these are fundamental.
And finally, what is the vision of the Heritage Foundation when it comes to America and Europe together or separate? Where do you see these two world powers, as from the foundation's point of view? Yeah,
no, I think we always state my words are our goal is is to make the nation free, safe, and prosperous, right? And what I like to remind people is, if you look at the U.S. Constitution and you read the preamble, if it could boil it down as one sentence, it says, we should have, freedom, we should be prosperous, and we should be safe. That's kind of what it says. Then you actually read the Constitution and you say, well, which is the most important? Like, what happens if I have a choice, between economic growth and security? What should I do? And the Constitution says nothing, right? It says, well, all three are important. It's like if you have a car, and well, what's the most important? Is it the steering wheel or the tires or the brakes? And the answer is, well, it doesn't matter, because you can't drive a car without any of them. So they're all important. And so what the Constitution actually does is it says the tension between these things is natural, and you should be constantly debating it and fighting over it to get the right answer for the times that you're in. So I think that this tension that we're having in Europe is a good sign, because it shows that people recognize that Europe has challenges, and the only way it can grow and prosper is to meet those challenges. And obviously, the U.S. is, we're all stronger if we are proceeding with common purpose. Here's the difference, right? Not the difference, but Donald Trump is an American conservative is like, we are going to be a free, safe, and prosperous nation, period. You can come with us. If you're not going to come with us, we'll figure it out, because we're Americans, right? If you are going to come with us, great, we'll do it together. But you can't just say, I'm going to be your partner, but I'm going to have energy prices that drive me into poverty. I'm going to have a continent that's overrun and can't sustain its own democracies, and I'm going to be your partner, because that's not going to work for me, right? So we need the partners we need, and the thing is look, I think most Europeans want that. Europeans want to be prosperous. They want to be safe in their own homes, and they like their freedom.
Oh, definitely.
Yeah,
they do. So what gives?
So I again, because I go back and I say, and maybe I'm a little more optimistic than a lot of people because I've lived through this thing so many times in the 50s, in the 60s, in the 70s, and then in the 80s when we all lionized Ronald Reagan. We forget in the 80s, Europeans thought he was going to start a nuclear war and get them all killed, right? And so
I remember better read than dead. These were the word of the day in Germany in 1980s.
Yeah, and we got through all those times, and the reason why is not just because of values and stuff, but because survival dictated that if we wanted to survive and thrive, that we needed friends and we need to work together, and I think that's what'll happen now.
Thank you.
Sure, thank you.
Thank you.